Hello. Thank you all for joining us as part of this double feature about new dev mode functionality. We're going to take you through the new dev mode workflow features and go deeper into how they work. Let's get started. To start us off, I want to talk a little bit about zooming into the details and zooming back out to the bigger picture. Let's start zoomed out. You've probably seen a diagram that looks like this explaining how a team should build products. And this makes it look pretty simple. You should just follow these steps, and you'll end up with a great product. In reality, your process probably looks quite a bit more similar to this. Feels a lot more chaotic, and you're kind of saying, where'd that nice structure go? If you feel like this, you're not alone. We feel like this too. However, when you sort through all this chaos, you can see that there's a few pieces that always exist. No matter what steps you took to get here, there comes a point in your process where you and your team have decided on something to build. These steps show up every time. And this is where handoff takes place. Handoff doesn't mean the exact same thing for every team, but there's always a moment in time where you align on something to build and developers start building. This is a really key point in time. After this point, every single change to the designs needs to be clear and understandable to everybody involved. It's also at this handoff moment where ready for dev comes in. You want to indicate that a specific design is ready to be built, so you mark it ready for dev. But what happens next? It's rare that that design is going to stay exactly the same throughout all of development. What's the right way that you should use dev mode to support this loop of handoff, changes, building, iterating? Before I get into those details, let's jump back in time 1 year to talk a little bit about how we got to this point with dev mode. We've been busy since our open beta launch 1 year ago. After our launch, we shipped hundreds of fast follow improvements and fixes based on feedback from all of you. At the beginning of this year, dev mode came out of beta with new features like annotations, measurements, and an overhauled compare changes tool. Just 2 months ago, we launched Code Connect into beta. And stay tuned, there's a talk coming up right after this to go deeper into that. And that takes us to today. As we were building features like annotations and measurements, we kept hearing about handoff and how supporting a good handoff workflow between designer and developers can be hard. So we wanted to dig in deeper and learn how dev mode could help. We talked to all different types of teams, large, small, agile, waterfall-y, co-located, distributed, to make sure we understood what was actually difficult about handoff. All these different teams emphasized that changing designs really caused challenges. If designs never changed, handoff would be a lot more straightforward. Even for teams that were happy with how they ran their handoff, they still weren't happy with their processes for dealing with changes that happened after handoff. From our research, we pulled out 3 truths about handoff in Figma today. The first truth is that designs are going to change, no matter what type of team or process you have. The second truth is that finding the specific design you've been handed off can be hard. I'm sure you've tried to find some specific frame or section in a massive file. It can be really tough. It's even tougher for your teammates, often developers, who spend a lot less time in Figma. And third was what you have easy access to while you're inspecting is really important. It's not enough to know that that information exists somewhere in Figma. It needs to be accessible and visible without needing to hunt for it. Let's talk more about how each of these handoff truths impacted what we built for dev mode. Going back to this first truth that designs are going to change, changes aren't necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of good reasons for designs to change. Maybe you learned something during implementation, like something was harder to build or easier to build than you originally anticipated. Maybe you've gotten feedback from stakeholders or from users, something like user testing, where you've learned that there are ways to improve usability. Or maybe you're just coordinating with other teams who are launching features or building things that impact the space that you're working in. All of these are good, important changes, but even these good changes have consequences. Knowing that designs will change, what would it look like for dev mode to make those changes as painless as possible? Ideally, dev mode would do a few things. First would be making it really clear when changes happen to a design that's been handed off. It should be obvious that that design has changed without needing to dig deep to find that info. Second is understanding why the change happened. Having information right in Figma about the intention behind the change, why was that change made? Sometimes changes are obvious, but often there's important context that needs to be shared. Third is making it even easier to compare before and after changes. Compare changes, the tool, can show you a detailed diff, but it's not always obvious when you should open that tool or what you should be comparing. If we made these types of improvements, changing designs would be a lot less painful for both designers and developers working in Figma. The second truth is that finding designs can be quite hard. Figma is flexible and powerful, but it doesn't require you to organize in any particular way. This is great before handoff, as it's easy to quickly iterate and riff and try different explorations without being constrained. But when it comes time for the developer to find that one specific design that they need to build, all these other designs across all these different pages can be confusing and distracting. Just getting to a specific design can be a major challenge, especially for people who are less familiar with the ins and outs of Figma. So what could dev mode do to make it easier to find the relevant designs? First is giving developers a way to see only the designs that are ready for dev. Even though today you can use ready for dev to indicate frames or sections that are ready, you still have to navigate across the canvas and across many pages to find where those designs are. The second is more tools for finding within that set of ready for dev designs exactly the design that you want. If you're like us, you probably have dozens of frames and sections that are marked ready for dev after handoff. Tools to search or filter within that set of designs would definitely help speed things up, especially for developers. And third is the ability to close the loop. Once designs have actually been implemented, they still say ready for dev. Until now, there hasn't been a way to indicate that those designs that are ready for dev have actually been completed. If dev mode had these pieces of functionality, it'd go a long way towards improving the handoff and implementation experience. The final handoff truth that was really clear from our research was that what's at hand, what's right at your fingertips, is really important while you're inspecting. There's a difference between information being available and being visible. It's crucial to have this high priority information, like what has changed, obvious and visible to everyone. We heard from developers that it was easy to get overwhelmed and distracted by other things on the canvas, and that specific important pieces of information that they really needed were easy to miss. How should dev mode help solve these problems? One way is giving developers a way to focus on a specific design. When you're inspecting a specific frame or section, all the other information on the canvas can get distracting. With a way to focus on just that specific frame or section and tune out all the other noise, developers would have a much easier time inspecting and getting the information that they need. Another way that dev mode could help is by surfacing important information even more prominently. When you're inspecting, there's so much information available to developers. Dev mode should help developers focus on the most important aspects of inspection, including change history, without requiring you to have to dig in and search through a lot of other things to find it. We took these learnings and we built some powerful new functionality into dev mode. To walk you through a live demo, I'm going to hand it over to Noga and Hugo.
Thanks very much, Benson. Perfect. Thanks so much, Benson. So by day, obviously, myself and Noga are designer advocate and engineering manager at Figma. But by night, we moonlight for a company called Epoch, which is a platform, a marketplace for buying and selling 3D assets, audio files for your next experiential experience. So we've been working on a feature to improve the library inside of our application. And we've got to that point that Benson called out earlier, that point between spec and build, where I'm starting to get these designs ready to hand over to Noga to think about the implementation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use Shift-D on my keyboard to switch into dev mode. I tend to find this is easiest, but there's a bunch of different ways that you can obviously enter into dev mode. And I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to select the measurement tool from down here. And if you've been a bad designer like me and you've not used auto layout, then this is a really great opportunity to call out certain measurements that might not be as abundantly clear to your developers on implementing. So I'm going to draw a line from the top of this menu bar over to here, and then I'm also going to do it out to the side. And I've also got the opportunity to move these outside of the frame if there's maybe like an image as a background in some instances. things to just sort of make that a little bit clearer when a developer comes in to inspect this design. The other thing is I'm going to use the annotation feature, which is really helpful for calling out certain aspects to do with properties that might require the developer to make a deeper level selection inside of the design. And this is really like a great opportunity to call those things out, because even if something changes within the design between now and when we actually ship, these things can update dynamically. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this layer. And actually what I want to do is not select the input form that's here, but actually select the layer above that. And I can right-click that on inside the layers panel, and I can click Add Annotation. And what I want to call out specifically here is the fact that this has a max width. And the reason for that is because we've had some discussions prior to this handover about how some of the reflow behavior is going to work between the mobile view and the desktop view over here. And we want to make sure that that all assets section moves over to the right once the viewport expands. So I'm just going to also add in a little comment about that, just to say max width defined to help with reflow. Then I'm going to click Return. And all of those things have now marked up. Now, obviously, this is just some smaller ones for the smaller details that we're adding for the purpose of this demonstration. You'd probably add a bunch more to your screens. But this is kind of a starting point, and I feel like this is now ready to hand over to Noga for development. So I'm just going to select the arrow key at the bottom here, select the frame, and mark this as ready for dev. Now, I can actually copy this link directly from the canvas by pressing Command L, and I can share that link, and it will dive Noga directly in. But because she's already been working with me on this file, because design handoff is not a linear process, Noga will actually be receiving a notification to let her know that this has changed. So I'll now hand over to Noga to inspect the design.
Thank you, Hugo. As Hugo mentioned, since I have a dev mode seat and I've been already in this file before, I just got a notification letting me know that Hugo marked something new as ready on the file. I'm going to open that file. And then instead of searching for the designs all over the canvas, I can go straight to the new Ready for Dev view. Here, I can see all the frames and sections that are ready to be worked on in one predictable view, regardless of how Hugo set up his file. By default, this is sorted by recent activity, so I can quickly go over and see what recently changed. I can also see different sorting options, like sorting by page or in alphabetical order. The Ready for Dev view does not require a dev mode seat, so it's really useful to share a link to this space with your team, and they can always land in it as a useful entry point for the file, even if they don't have a dev mode seat. And one other thing I'll call out here is that we have our feedback button right here. If you hit it, it's going to open a feedback form where you can share your reactions and impressions from the new features with us. We're reading every comment that's submitted here, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you. Going back real fast. I will now click on this first design right here that I see Hugo marked as ready just 2 minutes ago. This will open it in Focus View. Focus View shows me just the design I selected, and it hides everything else on canvas, so I can focus on just what I'm about to build. Here, I can hover the designs to get all the information I need about the components that are being used, and I can also click them to get the properties I need for building in the right-hand panel. Looking at this design, I noticed that there's a search bar here, and this reminds me of a screen I implemented a few days ago to the same app, where we had the search functionality and also a filtering functionality. I think we could fairly easily implement the same filtering functionality here, and I think our users will love it. So I'm going to quickly go back to the Ready for Dev view, going to filter it by completed to see what I just marked as completed 3 days ago. That was really easy to find. And I'm going to copy a link to this filter component from here to share with Hugo. I'm going to right-click, copy link to selection, and then using the X button here, I can go back and go to the designs we were looking at before. Here, I'm going to choose the Comments tool, mark this area. Whoops. mark this area and tag Hugo with my suggestion. So I'm going to say, I think we can quickly add filtering here too, like we did in Browse. And I'll even add the link to that component so he knows exactly what I'm talking about. What do you think? And let's see what Hugo thinks about my idea.
Cool. So back on my screen, I can see that the notification has come through. And this is a really good idea to be able to implement. And I think this is this back and forth between design and engineering. If there's these opportunities or constraints, some of these things don't appear until you're in that process of implementation. So these good ideas can come from anywhere. And I think that the suggestion here from Noga is great. So in order to be able to implement that, I'll just switch back into design mode. I'm actually going to go into the assets panel because I know where this component lives, and I'm going to type in filter. And I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to drag and drop this directly into my auto layout frame, and this all adjusts accordingly. Now, I've made that change, but there's also been another change that has happened, which hasn't been captured directly inside of Figma. And we recognize, obviously, that that's the case for a lot of teams. There's a water cooler moment. And I've had a conversation with Benson around how we might need to update some of the copy. This section at the bottom says all assets. But maybe we need a way to make this a little bit clearer to define that you, as a user looking at this view, know that all the assets that are below this part are all ones that you've purchased. So I'm going to select this text here, and I'm going to update this to say your instead, and put a little space. And you'll notice that the indicator for ready for dev up at the top here has now turned to yellow. If I hover over this, you'll see that it says design has changed since it was marked as ready for dev. And if I select it, it pops up this dialog that asks me to be able to provide some context for the changes that I've made. Now, I think this is the kind of thing that's really good for designers to take into consideration. Oftentimes we will make changes, but maybe not be the best at communicating those things back. And some things happen outside of Figma that need to be communicated. So I like to see this as a really great way to think about the business decisions that have happened so that this information can appear inside the versions inside of Focus View so that any developer or anybody looking inside of Focus View knows exactly what those junctures are. So I'm just going to use a bulleting for this. So I'll just say added filters as this existed, if I can type, existed in Browse based on a conversation with Noga, and copy change based on a conversation with Benson. And notice, I don't really need to specify exactly what the copy change is, because all of this will become apparent once Noga's inside of Focus View. So I'm going to say that I'm done with changes, and now I'm going to hand back to Noga to be able to look at that implementation.
Cool. So it looks like Hugo made some updates to the design. And it actually looks like he is still here in the file. So let's say hi. Hi, Hugo. When viewing a frame in Focus View, as you can see, what I see is the live version of the file. So if Hugo were making any live updates, I would have seen it here in real time. When I have nothing selected in Focus View, the right-hand panel shows me the versions of this design. If for some reason I don't want to see the live version, but I want to work off of a previous version, I can inspect it by clicking this ellipsis right here and choosing Inspect this version. But this time, I don't want to inspect an older version. I do want to implement this version with the latest changes that Hugo introduced. And Hugo left some really useful notes for me here about the context behind those changes. But I'm going to hit Compare to Latest Versions just to see the actual diff between those two versions and make sure I have everything captured. So here I can see the diff both visually side by side and also in code. And I can easily see that he added the filtering button just like I suggested, and he also made this copy change, which is great. I can go ahead, implement those changes, and when I'm done, I can go back to this file and mark this design as completed using the button right here. This will let Hugo and other teammates know that this has been implemented. And here I want to call out that developers, even with just view permissions to the file, can mark things as completed. So you don't have to give edit permissions for developers to be able to change that status. And now let's go back to the slides. So you might be wondering, is anything ever really completed? And while we recognize that the full product itself is never actually complete, a specific deliverable that we all aligned on and agreed should be shipped can definitely be completed. And marking as such in Figma closes the loop and lets your teammates know what's been implemented. These new features all allow your team to spec, build, and ship while staying aligned. Let's reiterate what we've seen. We've introduced a new home for everything that's ready for dev in a file. This is a useful entry point for developers to land in, find what they're looking for, and see what recently changed. We also have a new focused inspection experience. Focus View hides other elements on the canvas so that developers can easily concentrate on just the selected design and get the information they need for building. And finally, the new changed and completed statuses help designers and developers stay in sync throughout the process. Now, when a designer is making a last-minute change, they can notify the developer and leave notes. The developer will get a Slack notification. They can compare changes to the previous version to see exactly what changed and know what they need to work on next. All these features are now available on organization and enterprise plans.
We've only been able to build these new workflows based on the feedback that you've given us. So keep it coming. We want to hear from you. What's working, what's not, and what could be improved. Be sure to hammer that feedback button that you'll find in the Ready for Dev view, which Noga showed during the demo. All of this feedback goes directly to the team building it, as she mentioned, so please be kind. And we want to continue the conversation directly with you. We are really interested to hear how different teams are defining your own Ready for Dev moment during handoff. So please join the conversation with me over on X to share what you found to be most effective and why. Because if there's one thing that we want you to remember, it's that change is good, even during handoff. You just have to find better ways to signal it. And we have a responsibility to find better ways to support you in that communication across design and development. Because ultimately, when you zoom in, it's the details that matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.